about my journey, and it was so interesting that she mentioned the issue of my childhood, my history. You know, it's often our history and our childhood and where we come from that influences who we are. And at some point we have to make tough decisions about what that means and how we live or don't live with that. So I'm going to reflect a little bit on my own journey, and then talk more broadly about our position as women in society, because that's the kind of work that I do. I do gender consulting in gender and women's rights, and I also coach women leaders. So I'm going to focus a little bit on that today. Has anybody heard about the childhood wound? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Many of us who have been in therapy and in coaching, who are coaches, have learned about the childhood wound. And it's exactly what you talked about. This thing that shapes us when we grow up. Our parents, our communities, our experiences at school, in our lives, and so on. And one of the things I learned late in my life when I started coaching was about the childhood wound. And so I call this the childhood wound because it's something that I call it a wound, but in a way it's not a negative thing, because it has shown me the way. So I come from a community, from parents who were very political. My mother was a social worker. My parents divorced when I was very young. I was 10 years old, and so my mother has always been the pivotal person in my life. And I think for me that's in a way where my feminism started. This idea that women, in a sense, can do it all, even though sometimes they are forced to do it all. I experienced racism also very early in my life. I grew up in an Indian community, and as you can see, I don't look very Indian, so it was a bit of a challenge for me. But I think what happened with that was two things. One was that I always had to work harder to prove myself. And that's an analogy we can make with women, right? So as women, we always have to work twice as hard to show that we are good enough. And so for me, in that school situation, I always did that. I excelled at sports, I excelled at my academic work, because I had to prove to the racists that I am not less than. But for me, those experiences, as well as this idea of achieving, I had a father who was very much about, you must achieve. So if you come second in class, then it's not good enough, right? You have to, why are you not first in the class would be the question. And not well done, you know, you're on the right path. So those are for me the two experiences that really shaped who I am and who I became. And that was essentially about being an achiever. I have to prove to others that I am good. I have to prove to others that I'm worthy. I have to always work twice as hard, thrice as hard to show others that I can do it. And in a sense that that made me into the kind of perfectionist that I became. Now I call myself a recovering perfectionist, because for those of us who think perfectionism is a good thing, actually it's not. So in that line of being an achiever and always wanting to do well and so on, everything was about my career. From the day I finished school, went to university and so on, it was always about my career. I need to be successful, I need to do well in life, I need to excel, I need to be recognized, etc., etc. And so my whole life was about that. But what was also good about that time in my life was that my feminist education started there. I'm sure most of you know Toni Morrison passed away this week, right? She was my feminist educator. Her books, bell hooks, those were the women that taught me about feminism. But I also belonged to a group at university a women's group at university that really supported me in that area. And more than my academic education, that feminist education was what pushed me in the direction that I wanted to be in terms of my passion and my life. I have 2 failed marriages, and I think that was a major blow. You know, if you're a perfectionist, you think everything must go right, and now it's not going the way you planned it. You know, it almost makes you kind of question yourself and why, what did I do wrong? But it's life. Things don't work out, and you have to, you know, you have to move on from there. And I had my one and only when I was almost 36. So in hindsight, if I had to do it differently, I would have had her when I was younger, because maybe I would have had better energy and better support for her. But again, we are where we are, and we're making the best of it. And also, I've kind of, you know, there's this thing about cycles. I don't know if you have that. My mother was a single parent, I'm a single parent. And so many things that my mother went through, I'm going through. So it's really, pardon? Yes. So we have hope for this generation and for our kids' generations that things would be different and better. So I've talked a lot already about my women's rights background. It's what I live for, it's my passion. I love to serve women. I love to make the world right for women. And if I don't do this work, I wouldn't be happy. It's difficult work, it's very stressful, but it's, you know, it speaks to my heart. So I've also worked in that space most of my life. I've worked around gender-based violence, doing a lot of work around changing laws, you know, the Domestic Violence Act, Sexual Offences Act. I've been actively involved in those processes, as well as engaging with government and decision makers around laws that discriminate against women, the Employment Equity Act. I've done a lot of work in that space as well. I put Badu there because there was a time in my university years, and soon after that I was called a radical. And I used to wear my doek all the time. And so a friend of mine used to call me Badu. Erica Badu, yeah. Essentially what he was trying to say is like, you're too much. You know, you're too radical, you know, your views are too radical and so on. And in fact, I embrace the term because I love Erica Badu, and why wouldn't I want to be like her? But I think it's this thing about labeling, you know, and I also think it's about us choosing what we decide to do with those labels. So people may call you what they want, but how you receive it and how you deal with it is up to you. So I had to get to a point in 2015, my life fell apart. You know, this idea I had of my career defines me. If I don't have my career, I have nothing. It all came crashing down in 2015. And what happened was that I was headhunted for a job in Cape Town. I moved us to Cape Town, and I was heading an organization in Cape Town. And it all went pear-shaped. And that experience basically was, for me, a turning point in my life. Because, you know, I had nothing. I didn't have the job anymore. I had some money, but I basically had nothing, and I had to start over. And I had to take her out of school again, and we had to move back to Joburg. Thankfully, I still had my home. But and then I went into coaching, and the thing that I learned about that was, you know, this idea that we have that we are defined by a career, or we are defined by success, or we are defined by money is a problem. And unless you make peace with yourself about who you are and what is important to you, you can have everything and you'll still not be happy. So for me, the important learnings during this phase was about, I was at the pinnacle of my career and things fell apart and I had to kind of take stock of where I am. And what I realized was that it was a new opportunity for me to start over. And with my coach, I was able to delve deeply into why I was where I was. And a lot of it was because of the expectations I put on myself. The fact that I thought I'm a perfectionist, and that's so wonderful, that I do great. So when you go for job interviews, I'm a perfectionist, you won't have any problems with me. I'm highly organized. No, I work long hours, I will give this job my all. But ultimately you realize that, if that's gone, then you wonder, what do I have? So for me, starting over was really about recognizing that I had to make peace with all those demons in myself about, having to show the world how great I am, but rather having to go back and understand that it doesn't matter what I do. I am great. I am good. And so that, I don't know if any of you know about the Enneagram, but that Enneagram really helped me to understand who I am, but also understand that I don't have to be so hard on myself about it, and that I can work with the qualities that I have. And now what I do is that I still work for myself. One of the things I've learned over these 20 odd years about my career is that I'm not an employee. I can never be someone's employee. I've had jobs and jobs and jobs and jobs, and I've always felt within a year I'm bored. So now I know I work for myself, I do the work I'm passionate about, and the work I'm passionate about is working to support women and working to change the world for those who are underprivileged. So a lot of my work currently focuses on that. I've written 3 ebooks. This is one of them, and after this event I will share them with you. So this one is about what you need to be board ready. I sit on a number of boards, and the biggest problem that I find is that there are not enough women. There are so many capable women out there, but we just don't see them on boards. So I've made it my mission to support more women to get on boards through my coaching program and through the ebooks that I write as well. And the coaching, as a coach, the work that I do is really about, I call it women who lead with courage. Because I think what I've learned over the years is that, we kind of go on this journey of being successful and so on, but we hardly ever stop to check if we are happy. If we are living our purpose, if we are living our passion. I was 45 when I realized that this is not the life that I want. And I think it's important for us to be much more conscious about what we do with our lives. And so part of the work that I do about women leading with courage is a strong emphasis on well-being, mental well-being, physical well-being, professional well-being. Because a lot of what we do as well, what I realized in 2015 was that my whole life fell apart partly because I wasn't taking care of myself. It was always just work. I never exercised, I didn't eat well, it was always just work. So one of the things I do in the coaching work that I do, a big part of my emphasis is on well-being, and physical and mental well-being. And one of the things that I really would like to emphasize with the women that I work with as well as in other spaces is this idea of boundaries. If we don't put boundaries in place, with the people in our lives, whether it's our jobs, our partners, our children, our families, you'll always feel like you're being pulled in all kinds of directions. So if there's one thing I can tell you to do today, it's that you need to have boundaries. You need to be really clear about what your boundaries are and what that means. It doesn't mean you have to be nasty. It doesn't mean you always say no, but it does mean that you are thinking from the perspective of, is this right for me or not? And therefore, can I do this or can't I do this? And being able to communicate that clearly. So, in relation to this idea of we as women being successful or standing up for our rights, standing up for our voice, using our agency to claim our space in the world, there's a lot that's wrong in the world as well. So we recognize that we can't, yes, I can stand and claim my space in the world, but if the world is not ready for that, then I have a problem. And I think many of us see that sometimes in the workplace, in our communities and so on. Everyone is not just open to us being assertive women, being successful women. So for me, it's we have to do two things. We have to stand up as individuals, but we also have to fix the world. And so part of what I do is I work in that space of trying to fix the world for women. So that if we do want to claim our space, the space starts opening up for us. So I wanted to just give some perspective around where we are in the world in terms of, our position in the world, where all the work that has been done in relation to women's equality, etc. This is a study done by the World Economic Forum. They do it every year, and this is it's called the World Economic Forum Global Gender Gap, and this was for 2018. And what they say is that on a number of levels, we have advanced in relation to gender equality, right? Education, I mean, you hear a lot about there are more girls in education than boys, for example. If you go to universities now, you'll also hear that there are more women in undergraduate studies than men. Well, postgraduate becomes a different story. And health and survival as well, there's been a lot of energy put into dealing with health, making sure that we deal with maternal mortality, infant mortality, and so on. I feel there's still a way to go on sexual and reproductive health rights. Yes, we have legalized abortion, but how many of us actually feel we can access that service and feel safe? So in some spaces around health, I think women's health, we still have some way to go. The one I wanted to emphasize was the one around economic participation and opportunity. So that's essentially about our professional lives and where we are in the professional space. And you will see that it's just under 60%. And the issue there is that we still have not made enough progress around women's position in leadership in the workplace, as well as women's remuneration in the workplace. So this is from our Commission for Employment Equity report, which gives an indication of how things have progressed since 2015 in relation to women's position in top management and women's position in senior management. So you'll see from 2015 to 2017, for example, the increase in top management has been 0.5% for women. And at senior management level, it's just about 1.4%. So So those of us who think we are leaders in our careers and so on, I think we must also recognize that we're a minority. You know, we're a minority in top management. If you have to break that down by race, for example, it's primarily white men who hold top positions, as well as in senior management. And then if you have to break the women down again in terms of race, then there'll be a further distinction in relation to where black women sit in that column. How many of you see that in your workplace?
Okay, guys, so this is a safe space. Hey, feel free to share whatever experiences that you guys have.
And we have had the Employment Equity Act since 1998. And this is where we are. So we have a long way to go in relation to changing where women are located in our society. And what it means is that it's not just me making my own way, but it's how am I opening up space for other women to come with me. And how am I challenging the space to ensure that it's opened. So the gender pay gap has doubled since January 2017. So since 1998, we should have seen an increasing, we should have seen our salaries increase and be more equitable with men. But in fact, it's been the opposite. And we've had a lot of discussion about this in the past, and this idea that we are seeing what we call a rolling back of women's rights in South Africa, right? If you recall in 1994 when we had the first parliament, how amazing it was. You know, how women were active, how women had voice, how women had agency, how we were able to engage government, engage stakeholders, and see change happening. But if you look at the last 5-10 years, things have been increasingly difficult, especially for us as women, to kind of claim our space. And if we do claim our space, then we get labeled. So this thing about the gender pay gap has been very interesting. The World Economic Forum places South Africa, I think it's 17th or 19th out of 149 countries in relation to the gender gap. So it means we basically are quite high in relation to that. But on the issue of pay, we are 117 out of 149, which means that this is our reality, and we really have to be engaging with it.
Sorry, just on your previous slide, I actually think, you know, in terms of statistics, if we actually dig deeper into that, women are put in those positions, yes. Women who are qualified, experienced, have the same sort of caliber as a man would, but they actually don't even have power. So it's actually just a tick box exercise to say we have a woman on the board, we have a woman on the executive team, but if you actually look at the interactions within those settings, a woman will say the same thing that is silently ignored. A man will come up with the same thing, and it's like, wow, this great idea, this great innovation. So even in terms of that, I feel like, yeah, it's literally companies ticking the box, but the autonomy and the power is still not there. And we've got a long way to go with that.
Indeed.
And my experience is that even though we put them in these positions, there's positions that are specifically targeted for women. It's obvious. They'll give a woman an HR executive position, marketing, etc. There's positions that are targeted for women. They are not put in the real positions of power. Supply chain exec, CFO, CEO. You know, it's those targeted. We are segmented and directed even in those spaces. And I mean, and quality, like, you know. And what I found in my space as well, because I just did work around this, is that it seems in numbers
if you take just the general numbers, there's a lot of women. But if you break them down, I mean, 41% of women in my organization within supply chain are sitting at the blue collar, like lowest level. And as you go down, it drops dramatically, 20% from blue collar to the next level. Then it drops, by the time you get to the top, there's just, even though it's 20% within executive management, I mean, that's like 3 people, 3 women within a team of like 12 or 17. So representation, serious issues there. And then the pay gap parity issue. I mean, I'm fighting an issue now at work where we are supposedly being given, they've extended our maternity leave to 6 months. But you extend maternity leave to 6 months, 2 months is unpaid.
Yeah.
So you give me more time, but you take money away from me. To survive as the primary caregiver, you know, how is that a new benefit? How is that a benefit? You know, so there's so many things that are glossing over the issues, but at the core, you know, women are